Things just took a scary twist for the Toronto Maple Leafs as we have a massive new report that has dropped surrounding Matthew Knies and his future in Toronto. But we also have a report surrounding John Tavares that shed some very interesting light on both of their futures, and it has some fans fired up. To break those down and discuss what it means going forward as free agency is inching closer and closer. But before we get into it all, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. So make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're part of that 71% who aren't subscribed. There's a lot to go over today and some interesting reports to discuss. And obviously, we're going to start with Matthew Knies. And of course, we all expected that Matthew Knies was going to be a Toronto Maple Leaf and get extended for next season. And while that's still probably going to be the case, a new report has dropped that has thrown a bit of a wrench into things here. And it's from Nick Alberga. And he came out and said just last night that with the NHL draft just around the corner and July 1st, of course, free agency looming, I'm told the Leafs and Matthew Knies are currently far apart in contract talks. That said, both sides remain optimistic and finding common ground in the coming weeks. But this is still pretty notable news. Now, of course, Matthew Knies, restricted free agent. How much he's going to get, we can dive into in the projections. But it seems that something that we expected was a given at this point, at least to get done before free agency opens. That way they can focus on other things. Brad Marchand, whatever they end up doing, trades is not as much of a given as we thought here. And do I think he's going to leave the Leafs? I don't think so. But clearly there is some sort of, one of the sides is being a bit harder than I guess the other side thought, because I think everyone thought that this was going to get done in a pretty timely fashion here. And the unfortunate reality is this might be dragged out for a little bit.
And I think this is affecting everything from John Tavares to the rest of the offseason plans at this point. That's why things have been very quiet. You see other teams like the Rangers starting to sign some of their RFAs, and the Leafs haven't really done anything. And I feel like it's because this is holding them up. And I do believe this to be true. I do think that Matthew Knies' camp, and probably for good reason, is asking for a lot of money. And I think the Leafs organization at this point in time is saying, look what just happened the last 8 years. We do not want to fork up a bunch of money to guys who, I'm not saying Matthew Knies is not going to perform, but I can understand why they're being very skeptical about this. And like I brought up in another video, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, they only got their double digit, like $10 million contracts the year after they won their third Stanley Cup. They only got the reward after they delivered championships to the city. And then the team said, listen, this is really going to mess us up in the salary cap of this team. We're probably not going to be competitive anymore, but here's your reward. Here's a thank you for bringing us the Stanley Cup. So I feel like the Leafs are, you know, really skeptical in terms of giving up that much money to a player that, he has been getting a lot better and he's been fantastic. I love Matthew Knies, but still somewhat unproven in the league, right? So it's going to be interesting. And I think that this is holding up, John Tavares because, based on what they give Matthew Knies, then they can pivot to John Tavares. And I feel like they do already have an idea of what John Tavares' contract would look like if they are to sign him, but they can't pull the trigger until they get Matthew Knies done. And on the other side of things, I think Mitch Marner is as good as gone. I don't think they're concerned with that anymore. He's signing somewhere else. There's reports that he wants to wait till July 4th to sign. Like there's a lot of teams that might be in the running that won't be anymore by that point because you got to start making moves or else you're going to miss out on other players. So that's very interesting in and of itself. But I feel like this at this point is holding everything up. And the other thing is, like you mentioned, he is an RFA, and we'll get into the specifics in a second and some more on John Tavares, but he is an RFA. The team has control over him, but come July 1st, anyone can offer sheet him. So, like if they have the necessary compensation, that could really make things difficult for the Maple Leafs if somebody offer sheets him at $9 million. And then if you want to keep Matthew Knies, you have to match that, right? So this could get very interesting. They got to figure it out in the next week because the draft, they do have some time. They have till, a couple Tuesdays from now, but the draft is next week. And ideally you'd want to have this sorted out for the draft so you can start making some other moves.
Yeah, and of course, he said he doesn't want to get offer sheeted. Reports are indicating that he wants to stay in Toronto. But you look at his projected cap hit, most likely 7.5-ish million, 7.3 million, the 3% outcome. And he's probably asking for 8 or 9. And of course, the big question mark lately has been whether it's going to be a bridge deal, whether it's going to be a 8 to 9 year deal. The initial report and the most recent reports, I believe it was Darren Dreger, Chris Johnson, are saying a bridge deal at 4 million, like seems to be not 4 million, sorry, 4 years and then more, 7 million. And then the question is, what's the point for the Leafs of a bridge deal if it's only 4 years and you're still getting paid the same AAV, because then you don't get a discount and then you have to pay him the same exorbitant amount in 4 years time, which I guess the benefit would be, of course, it's cheaper in the long term, at least in theory, if he doesn't play well, but you're kind of wanting to play well anyway. So his projection is high, and I think that's what's holding it up. Again, a $7.3 million is the most likely percentage because the cap hit's about 7.6%. Good news is the cap hit's going up each year, so I think ultimately they're going to get it done here, but it definitely has effects on everything, and that of course trickles into John Tavares, which Elliot Friedman came out and said you can see at the bottom. Leafs would like to do something with Tavares along the Tanev line, but a few teams and agents told him that the Nelson contract is something Tavares can do in the open market. So how can the Leafs chop that up? So let's dive into John Tavares now, because of course we've been talking about Matthew Knies, and we know it's going to be interesting there. It's interesting because there's also, of course, that we covered yesterday, the Matthew Shane extension, and now this new report from Elliot Friedman. He knows he can get more in the market, but I'm hoping that, I mean, this is two players now we've heard over the last week that we thought were going to get signed, but there is some complications in the numbers.
Yeah, there's a lot holding this up as well. And as we've gone over the last couple of days, and multiple reporters are saying that you're not going to get John Tavares for the Matt Duchene contract. There's a couple of reporters saying, tax, the no state tax has nothing to do with this. And then, going off and saying that, the reason Tavares is not going to sign for Matt Duchene's contract is because of state tax. I can't believe that the last couple of days. But for me, I'm slowly changing my opinion on Tavares and the way that this team needs to take shape heading into next year. So for me, Tavares, you go to Tavares and you say, listen, you're signing for Matt Duchene's contract, or you can go elsewhere, because we're in the business of winning at this point. We haven't won with you. We have to, and listen, Tavares is a great player, but I think you have to be careful. We would love to have you back. You're a great player. You scored almost 40 goals. You're great in the faceoff dot. All of these things. Maybe you go up to 5 million. I could see that, and it could make some sense for the Leafs. But you sign for around Matt Duchene signed, or you go somewhere else, and you can make 8 or 9, and that's fantastic. But we're trying to build a team that wants to win under, lower dollar amounts here. So, and an actual team that, yes, they do want to still spend to the cap, but it's a more full team, right? So I think that's kind of the way you got to look at it at this point. Like, I don't think the Leafs should be scared to cut ties with John Tavares if they absolutely have to, because I would be open again if he were to go on Robot Island or something like that, like a Chris Tanev contract, but it has to bring the AAV down. Like, you cannot sign him to $6 million over that term. That makes absolutely no sense with where the Leafs are at, right? So for me, it's like, listen, John, you want to be a Maple Leaf, you want to stay here. That's all great. You got to sign for something similar to Matt Duchene's contract. We'll give you a no movement clause in the first 2 years. That's all good, right? Even if you want that. But, we can't do a lot of term and a lot of money. It just doesn't make sense for this team anymore. So, I think you keep John Tavares, because there's been a lot of talk about just moving off certain players to change the DNA just for the sake of doing that. I don't know if you want to do that necessarily with Tavares. If he's willing to take less and stay, I think you do that. You keep him on the team. He's a great player still. But the reports coming out that he won't take less than 5, and he still wants like a Chris Tanev type deal in terms of like 6 years. That is tough.
Yeah, you see from Craig Button, 7.5 to 8 in the open market. I don't think there's any debating it. He could get more. And I mean, you compare him to Steven Stamkos and the contract he got. And then, of course, Pierre LeBrun came out and talked about some of the similarities. And he's saying there's no way Tavares signs for $5 million a year. So it's going to be interesting. We'll keep you up to date. But an interesting report from Friedman here talking about the Tanev line. So if you're interested in what John Tavares is most likely going to make, keep it around there. And for Matthew Knies, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with his future. But ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be crazy. We're going to keep you up to date with all the latest news. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. See you later.